I get a lot of questions, Josh, what are your credentials? Why are you doing this? Why are you working with women who are struggling to lose weight, to lose 20, 50, even 100 pounds, to improve their gut health and to balance their hormones? So I want to answer that question with a little bit of my history and a little bit of why I'm focusing in with women specifically because, the truth is the lifestyle, the whole health method really applies to everyone. It helped me a lot. It can help a young boy who's 10 years old, struggling with IBS, just like I was, right? And so, I want you to understand like where I came from, why I do what I do, and why I help who I help. So let's get started. So my journey really began growing up as a child and being very sick. I want to share a quote with you that really speaks to me. It was in the Tao of Pooh, and it says, "Those that get sick once live a long time, and those that never get sick live a short time." And that has continued to be true in my life because I don't know, maybe if you're like me and you're in a lot of pain, you're in chronic pain, you'll do what you need to do to get out of it, to reverse it. But if you're not feeling that pain, if you really, don't need to make a change because you can just take that pill and feel okay enough to keep going on, then you don't make that change and you do eventually maybe die of heart disease, die of a heart attack, as 1 in 3 of us will pass away from heart disease. And the lifestyle that we promote, the whole food plant-based lifestyle, one that I've found through my life, and I'll share my journey with you, is one that has been shown to actually reverse heart disease. And Caldwell Esselson's research with Dr. Dean Ornish and other studies separately, where they're able to take people with coronary artery disease and actually open their arteries on angiograms. So we have photos of this dating back to the 80s and the 90s, and we continue to see this work happen, right? And it's so easy to implement if you have the right strategies and the right program and the right support. All right. And so my journey is as a child, I was very sick. And I know that I was at least in the 7th grade. So I was 12 years old and I was praying to God. And why was I praying to God? Well, I was in a lot of pain. I was on the toilet constantly. I was playing baseball and I ran to the bathroom and I didn't make it. And I went to the bathroom in my pants. And so these experiences, along with living in Atlanta, Georgia, where I had to be in a car for 30 minutes to go to school, or be in a car for 30 minutes to an hour to go to a sports game, or to go anywhere, really, produced a ton of anxiety because I wasn't in control. I wasn't driving the car. And I don't know if you noticed, but with IBS and with these stomach issues, when you're in the passenger seat, sometimes it's harder when you're not in control. When you're driving, you can actually get to where you want to go. So really interesting mental changes that I noticed throughout my journey. But when I was 12 years old, I was praying because my stomach was in pain and I thought that I was going to die. Can any of you relate to that? Comment if you were going through a similar thing below. But it took me to my deepest place and to a really dark space. And, so what I did, what many of you may have done, I went to the medical system. I had a gastroenterologist who did change my life. And in a way that maybe was unexpected and doesn't always happen. And so we did the colonoscopy. They said, you're saying you're in pain, you have diarrhea, you're taking 4 Imodium a day, but when we do this colonoscopy, we don't really see anything wrong. Maybe a few polyps are developing, but we can't see anything. And I said, we want to do an endoscopy. We want you to swallow a camera. So I swallowed a camera. It was a pill. It was really big, really hard to swallow. A tough pill to swallow. And they said, just go find it on the way out, just so it comes out all right. Um, and I don't know where it went. I never saw it in the toilet. I hope it's not still inside of me. But they also found that things tended to look okay in the system. But I was in chronic pain, like many of you maybe. Maybe not, but a lot of people, maybe 40% of people, have some form of this disorder or gut discomfort. And, so that makes certain foods hard. And I learned that, I could explore the low FODMAP diet, the doctor told me. And so I was about, I may have been 14 or 15 years old when I was diagnosed. That was 15 years ago. And, from that moment, I I had a choice, will I change based on what the doctor recommended? He didn't seem so certain himself, but he did mention that the low FODMAP diet did have some efficacy, some evidence of success. And I said, well, I don't want to change my diet. I'm not, there's no reason to change my diet. Like I love the foods. I'm not going to sacrifice foods. And he said, well, okay, well maybe it's just like depression and anxiety and like if we can give you medication, because stress is related, right, to IBS symptoms. If we can give you medication, then possibly that could help you. And my mom said, no way. And I was like, okay, okay, that's good. But so then he said, well, you could try to just cut out high fructose corn syrup. And I said, wow, it's interesting. It's kind of in a lot of things, but it's not as extreme as the low FODMAP diet. So I'll try it. And at this time, I was gaining a lot of weight. I was in high school. I was gaining I was 196 pounds in high school, and the scale was only going up. I was insecure about my body. I was taking shallow breaths and sucking in, which actually really impacted the way that I breathe. So I wasn't taking deep, shallow breaths anymore. And throughout this journey, I'm just gaining more weight, like 5 pounds at a time. I was very skinny actually when I grew tall, and then I started just gaining and gaining and gaining. And over time, I just thought that this was going to be my normal, my new reality. I was at peace with it. And when he said cut out high fructose corn syrup, I tried that. And every single time I had it 3 times. I drank a soda called Cheerwine, and then I had Polynesian sauce from Chick-fil-A. And, both times that I had high fructose, I had diarrhea the next day. And I said, wow, those two there's clearly a connection. And I started actually losing weight, partially because of the high fructose, partially because of everything that I couldn't eat that had it. And we're talking buns, we're talking barbecue sauce, so buns from McDonald's, barbecue sauce. A lot of the foods at fast food no longer had flavor. All their sauces had high fructose corn syrup in them. So the unhealthy foods actually stopped tasting good at all. If you compare a really fresh fruit like a banana, versus a Pop Tart, right? Like you take out the sugar of a Pop Tart, like it tastes like dirt, you know? But the banana, I mean, just tastes amazing on its own. And so I started to notice that rather than my taste buds were sweetest thing was high fructose corn syrup, and fruit really didn't taste that sweet. Once I stopped eating the really sweet stuff, fruit started tasting a lot sweeter. And so I feel like I got flavor back. I got diversity back of foods. And so at the same time, I had learned about the low FODMAP diet. I had a handout and I was like interested because I'd already made some changes. I didn't really think that I could do it, but I made some small changes. And so I didn't have any guidance. So I called an organization with, people that offered low FODMAP diet and they said, well, insurance doesn't cover it. It's going to be $150 an hour. And I said, wow, like I'm in college, I can't afford that. So I'm going to try it on my own. Tried it on my own, which was a mistake. It would have been worth it to actually invest in my health and to actually have somebody guide me through the process. But instead, um, I learned it. I got things under control, but I also didn't know the serving sizes. So I didn't have the Monash app. I was just kind of relying on like Facebook and online platforms. It wasn't super helpful for me. And, as a result, I was eating the low FODMAP diet for 8 months to a year, which you are not supposed to do. It is an elimination diet, which is intended to be, 2, 4, 6 weeks. They essentially get you out of pain by lowering foods that cause gas. Because while these foods are very healthy and cancer killing, like talking garlic, onion, which are extremely cancer killing, a lot of brassicas, the broccolis, um, these things are moderated, so I don't want you to think that these are bad foods. But because your gut is sensitive, these foods cause sensitivity. You can, in theory, and this was only developed in 2005, you can, in theory, lower the gas, lower the pain, and feel better, and your symptoms will feel more like a normal person would feel. And so this really was interesting and revolutionized my symptoms and my symptom management. I knew that before I traveled, before I did things that maybe there wouldn't be a bathroom, maybe I'd be driving for an hour or two, like I would and still do lower my FODMAPs consciously, if I have the choice, right? And that was part of my journey for so long. I was actually traveling in Argentina, which they don't have a lot of plants. I eat a lot of plants. And I guess I didn't really know exactly what to eat, to feel really full. It took me years to understand this on my own. And so I ended up fainting one time in Patagonia trying to get on a plane to go to El Calafate because I didn't have the right food, and I also didn't advocate for myself. I was traveling, I was studying abroad, I was with community and friends, but I didn't know how to meet my needs, right? So, and I didn't have support along the way. And so, moving forward in time, going to the University of Georgia, I started learning psychology, learning about stress, following Kelly McGonigal's work. I really love her book, The Willpower Instinct, where initially she talked about the negatives of stress, right? And how we can calm our stress and how breathing and meditation can calm our stress. I started practicing meditation early at 16 years old. I started learning about deep breathing and feeling my body change as I was changing FODMAPs. So it was interesting to kind of have them both going and not really knowing which one is having the bigger effect. Um, but I was learning about meditation, about movement, about posture, and moving my body, right? And so these are all things that created a holistic support system that really helped me heal. And that's why the whole health method, the whole echoes to Dr. T. Colin Campbell. His book Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition, is one that inspires me on a daily basis. It talks about the idea that we're seen in a silo. The gastroenterologist, before asking me what I ate, because I don't even, if they would have known what I ate, if they knew that my food was mostly processed food, mostly very unhealthy, lacking in whole grains, it had processed grains, but whole grains, lacking in greens at all, lacking in fruits for all intents and purposes, I would sometimes put sugar on the fruit, on the strawberries to make them taste good, right? And lacking in mushrooms, lacking in this diversity of food that really helps the microbiome. So I think if those questions were asked, and if we really truly explored the microbiome, the plants around us and the plants on the shelves that have a lot of healing potential, we could have made some pretty significant progress without needing the colonoscopy and needing an endoscopy. But the way the system's set up, unfortunately, is that people, doctors can be sued if they don't try and test everything. Like if you do have cancer, if you do have something inside of you that could kill you, in theory, if they're not testing for it, you could die. And people sue them, and it's the whole thing. I don't claim to understand this at all. But as a result, instead of, you know, thinking about really feasible options of the fact that my stomach, what is the number one exposure to it? It's the food that goes into my mouth and down my body, right? That could play a role, and like let's investigate that role. But unfortunately, with IBS, insurance doesn't really pay for help, or at least it didn't in my case. I've asked dietitians; they say it still doesn't, at least the past month. Um, and so the system is not set up to have you understand how your food is interacting with your body, and the research isn't set up because there's often not a funding agency. You can grow blueberries, I can grow blueberries. There still is some funding for blueberries. Um, there's not funding for sparkleberry, Vaccinium arboretum, which is a tree blueberry that's a common plant up in the mountains of northwest Georgia, where I like to go from time to time. And violet leaves, which grow here, they're slimy, mucilaginous. They help coat the stomach. They help with coughs. They're amazing with coughs. The leaves, I mean, the flowers, those violets of the purple and white colors. Those we got a dog coming and joining it. enjoying the time here. But those violets and these flowers have anthocyanins, they have anti-cancer properties. So there's not really a funding source to support basically studying violets to see if they're healthy for you. And nobody to prescribe violets and nobody to get paid from that prescription. And so that's why I wanted to learn, first of all, like if I don't need to spend money, if I don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on medication. I mean, Imodium wasn't that expensive, but the procedure, it makes gastroenterologists about $2,000 per colonoscopy, right? And to follow up and to talk about diet and nutrition, they make like 25 bucks. And there's never ending amount of people that need a colonoscopy, right? So as a result, we're basically not, the highest level of authority in the medical system, the doctors, are not able to really even prescribe nutrition because no one's really getting paid to do that. And, as the costs of healthcare continue to rise, the subsidies being removed, I mean, it's a sensitive time, right? And when I was getting, maybe I'm jumping forward here a little bit, but when I got my master's of public health, we learned that the healthcare costs are going like this. People are getting sicker and sicker, right? We have more disease than ever. We're taking more medication than ever. Most people over 65 are taking 2+ medication. And so if you're struggling with stomach issues and pains and nausea, vomiting, lightheadedness, which a lot of women, especially as they get closer to 70, especially in the 80s and 90s, it is so hard to identify which medication of the 7 we're on caused the lightheadedness or is maybe causing the gut issues, right? So it becomes very difficult to see the medical system helping with diet and with lifestyle. So I wanted to help people like myself who are struggling with gut health, in the meantime here, also struggling with mental health and struggling with my own mental concerns. So I got actually a psychology degree because of mental health, spirit, like mental well-being and how we communicate with others, understanding trust and respect, communication. I really loved and still do love nonviolent communication. Um, but I, wanted to find this holistic well-being. And as I was studying mental health, I realized that our mental well-being is not disconnected from our physical health. The food that we eat, I'm going to pick up a green onion here, which this one is a non-native green onion, Allium vinale. And by the way, if you struggle with gas, the green tops do not cause nearly as much gas as the bulbs, which is interesting from the perspective of life, giving life, but it's a nice soothing compound here. So around this time, around 16 years old, a lot of things happened at the same time for me. I began going into the forests. I got really interested in mushrooms, their healing potentials, the religious, spiritual potentials about mushrooms, what foods, what medicines, what experiences we can have with mushrooms that grow all around us. And while out in nature, I started to realize that I wanted to actually know how I could survive without, you know, living in this society and going back to nature like my ancestors did, right? What would I need to do? And I learned that we probably need food and we probably need healthy food and we probably need good access to it, right? And so I also learned that 70% of the medication we use today came from plants. And a lot of times the plants outperform the medication. Like with blood pressure, we can use hibiscus. We can use flaxseed, cholesterol, flaxseed. We can use black cumin. There's different spices that can be used to actually lower cholesterol, to lower blood pressure. So I started to learn about the interconnection between the plants around me, the medicine that's free. Like onion, for example, was tested. They gave women onion and they took their blood and dripped it on cancer in a petri dish. And they were able to prevent all of the cancer from growing in all 8 cancers with onion. Whereas carrots actually had no effect. The cancers actually even grew a little quicker. And lettuce didn't have effect. Cucumbers didn't have effect. Tomatoes didn't have an effect. So that's the typical American salad. The onion is actually the cancer killing part of it. But this onion that's cancer killing that you can just go buy in the store, it grows right here. So there's not, this is not sponsored by Big Green Onion right now. This is sponsored by Josh, who cares about your health and has learned through over 14 years of experimentation, of learning what's working, what's not. And before that, 5, 6 years of suffering through chronic stomach pain from just, doing what everyone else is doing, right? Like at first I thought that I was missing out. Like, oh, I can't have Coca-Cola like everyone else. I can't have cakes like everyone else. And then I started to realize that no, I'm blessed. I'm lucky that I got sick when I did, because I care. I care about my health now, and I don't want to feel bad. So again, those that get sick once live a long time, and those that get sick not at all live a short time. So I'm gonna take a tea break right here. So one of the things I love about knowing about the plants around me is that there's always tea. And right now, this tea, we actually foraged some anise scented goldenrod, Solidago dora, and it's got a very nice flavor. And it also has a hint of some nettles, a little bit of a spice from my spice bush that I like to forage. So, I started learning on my own, 16, how to forage about the plants around me. I was also very blessed. My dad has a PhD. His PhD is in engineering, but his library on Audible covers the span, basically, philosophy, psychology, but also diet and lifestyle. So my dad actually introduced me to Dr. Michael Greger, who has a website called nutritionfacts.org. And that website is an evidence-based site that cites all of its sources behind the video so that you can make the decision for you, and is one of the best resources that I recommend to everyone to use. And I have spent countless hours on that site, hundreds of hours, watching those videos basically on a daily basis. I also, while conducting my Master's of Public Health, consulted that website because it has some of the best peer-reviewed information there. And the best thing about that site is that they cover hundreds of thousands of studies published every year, and they find stories that are helpful, that tell you about diet and disease and how to help potentially reverse and prevent many of our leading killers. So Dr. Greger's books, How Not to Die, How Not to Diet, How Not to Age, he's got a few more now, and his cookbooks have been influential. Throughout that time, I realized that a whole food plant-based diet had amazing potential. I saw Forks Over Knives on Netflix. I saw quite a few different documentaries and learned about different doctors that were getting amazing results. Like I got to learn that Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn was reversing heart disease, that Dean Ornish was able to reverse heart disease, then reverse stage 1 prostate cancer, stage 3 prostate cancer, and now he's working, I believe he might have worked with breast cancer, don't quote me on that, but he is currently working with dementia, and the results are amazing. Actually, early stage dementia, being able to unwind that so that we're not forgetting our loved ones, like what happened to my grandfather, where at the end of his life, my mom asked, like, are you happy to see your grandson? He was always happy to see me. I said, no, not. And I know he didn't believe that, but that's why I do it, is that these conditions can often be reversed and certainly most likely prevented with the right diet and lifestyle, right? And so now how do you get there? We all know that you should be eating vegetables. We all know you should be eating fruit. We all know you should be eating beans. We all know you should be eating mushrooms a little bit, the right ones, obviously the ones that don't kill you, but there's a lot of plants that could kill you too. And we also know that there's different ways to prepare them that actually can increase their cancer killing potential, the antioxidants in the food. So it's really nuanced. There's continual research, and most of us don't have time to read it. That's why I got a master's in public health. That's why I've learned how to access and read documents that sometimes cost $60 to $70 to buy. I mean, amazing that in order to actually come to a well-informed conclusion, you have to outsource that knowledge to somebody or spend a lot of time and money understanding how to do it. And so when I went to the university, at first I wanted to be a counselor for mental health. And I still love listening to people and hearing, what's alive in you, your needs. We have community here. We check in on people's needs, how they're feeling, what they're needing. And I started to realize though is that if we're not taking care of our physical health, our mind is not going to save us. Like if you completely avoid your physical health, your mental health will suffer invariably. And so mental health is key in towards at least my health with my gut, how I live and respond in the world. And also, I believe that what we're putting into our bodies every day is deciding, it's hard to have good mental health when you're in constant pain. When I had IBS in high school, my friend said, Josh, like, why are you so like frustrating to be around? She called me an asshole. I'm gonna be honest here. And I was because I was in constant pain, like I was holding in gas that smelled, right? And so I didn't want people to smell it, and I didn't even feel comfortable talking. Like I remember somebody brought coffee and sat it right next to me, and I thought that coffee was a trigger for my stomach. And I literally like had spasms in my stomach, in the colon. And so I know this probably happens to some people. It's not everybody. This is just my story. And so over this time, I'm making progress. I was 196 pounds. I made it down to 150 pounds. And I'm still at 155 to 160. I'm working to gain muscle. So I am like doing more push-ups, doing more weight-bearing activities. But I was able to lose that weight, keep it off, and also get out of pain. So I haven't taken Imodium in over 10 years now. I've found the plants, the herbs, like carminative herbs that help with gas, like fennel, like cumin, like mint, a lot of these different herbs, and just learning how to use what grows around me. So like you don't have to forage like I do, but the reason that I forage, and I've got a list I've been keeping, I've foraged over 100 mushroom species and 200 plant species in Georgia, the Southeast, and around the world. And it's just been such a pleasure to understand the food and medicine around me and to use it when I need. If I need to stop bleeding, to know which plants to use. And so, I wanted to learn like why are we not teaching this in school? So like when people ask, what are your credentials, right? Like what have you been certified in? I guess they're asking, right? Like doctors, for example, there's plenty of research which I can share. Maybe I'll share it right here. Um, the doctors don't tend to learn nutrition in medical school. Now, there are medical schools that are stepping up. It's amazing. This is new. This is a newer thing. Most doctors you're interacting with have not had this education. Most of them have had less than 20 hours, probably even less than that, according to many doctors that I hear, sharing their story of their medical education. But as a result, your doctors oftentimes when they give you medical advice, I mean advice on nutrition, it's usually not from a scientific source. It's not from spending hundreds of hours learning about that, and not just learning about the best advice to give you, but we know that our food is extremely social and behavioral, right? So what we eat is based on what our friends are eating and how well we're able to hold our space, right? And to have someone in our corner in our team to like support us. I always had supportive women in my life that supported me on my journey. I had amazing girlfriends, my mom, my sisters supported me, and a lot of my family along the way was very supportive. And a lot of the guys were not. Like a lot of guys did not support this dietary change. I didn't want to drink alcohol. I didn't want to go to the parties, and so I've gravitated towards working with women. So now the question is like, why am I working with women over 50? And the reason is that I've also seen that the people that are most likely to make a change are women. And I worked with Plant Pure Communities, an amazing nonprofit, and I was a regional manager. So I oversaw 160 groups that I checked in with their group leaders, saw if they were active, if they were, asked what they were doing, how they were supporting community, the events, We offered to co-host even online events during the pandemic. So we worked with groups in Pittsburgh, New York, in California, Reno, Florida, in Georgia. So we've done um, amazing things, and it was 80% women, right? The people actually getting the results and going out there. I'm not saying guys can't do it, clearly, but at least 8 out of 10 of the people were women. I've given talks here in Atlanta. I went to independent living and assisted living, and in both talks, there was 80%, sorry, 90% women. Out of 20 people, 18 were women. The two that were the men were actually supporting women there, right? So I can, this program can work with other people, but the women that are showing up, the people that are showing up are women over 50 that are coming in and saying, I need this. And why? It's because, you know, for better or for worse, men have often been told you need to eat meat. You need to like get more protein and more muscle, right? And women have been told like this, you can have salads and stuff, and you can like the color pink, you can like flowers. And guys, you're not allowed to like flowers at all, by the way. Even though flowers are delicious and I love them, right? And so another reason is that women are often the ones that get to cook. So in my family, I would go with family to the lake house. I remember this. And I would have to, with my dad, put away the boat, put away the skis, put away the food, the coolers, the drinks. I would have to pressure wash. I'd have to bang in the nails on the dock. I'd have to paint the fences, roof shingles, dig trenches. And my sister would get to help with making the food, making the lunch, right? So for better or for worse, you know, these gender norms, women tend to be the ones that actually do cook, right? A lot of times men do not know how to cook, let alone clean, right? Right? I'm working on it. That's my girlfriend. Clean a lot of the time. We're working on it. But in the end of the day, the whole food plant-based lifestyle, you can, and we just ate at Sweetgreen, a salad place. That's amazing. There are places that are growing more now than ever before where you can just go out to a restaurant and actually get healthy food. But a lot of times you might want to cook, because the restaurants are still going to put more oil than you need. They're still going to put more salt than you need and more sugar. And honestly, if you're over 50, if you're struggling, if you're on medication, if your blood pressure's going up, your cholesterol's going up, your A1C is going up. I mean, if these things are happening, you don't want to be adding in a high amount of the salt, oil, sugars that are processed, right? So learning to cook is something that sometimes guys, there's a video, men would rather die than like stop eating chicken and cooking. Yeah, basically. And chicken, because of prostate cancer, is a high link with prostate cancer, specifically in men. And that's really what it comes down to is that the people that are showing up and actually like taking on this change, loving it, loving cooking too. Like, let's just think about it from a numbers game. A lot of women love cooking. So the point is, I want to focus in on somebody that actually wants change. And people that are under 50, they may think, well, I don't really need to change. And they might not. They might have 10 years left they might have 10 years. They might have 15 years, 20. Maybe their life will be shorter when they're 65 or 70. Maybe their retirement will be a little less, long than other people, but YOLO, you only live once, right? And and like I said, when we're sick, we know that we're sick. We know that we need to change. But also know that the more we wait, the more medications pile up, the more conditions pile up. It is very hard to undo and untie those knots and to go slowly through that and to manage care with the medical team, which we do. We have to wait for the doctor to know that blood pressure is probably going to go down with this diet, that your cholesterol is probably going to go down, that the, A1C, we're going to be measuring your blood sugar levels, but that's probably going to, normalize as well. And if you're on medication, you run the risk of being overly medicated. So anyways, and again, I love this, what is your credential, right? Like Masters of Public Health. Well, I've got a video and I want to share this video with you. I'm essentially walking into the health promotion building. I focused in on health promotion and behavior so that I could actually help people implement lifestyle change and habits like I had just done for myself. And we're walking into the building. They had just redone it. Okay. and the snack hall is there where you can get some food in the health promotion building. It was sponsored by Coca-Cola. And so we got an ambulance coming, maybe, for somebody. And so the health promotion building, the snack area was sponsored by Coca-Cola. There was a big sign on the ground. It says, have a Coke. And I open, I look, there's ice cream candy bars. And I was, for whatever reason, looking at added sugars for tea. Because I had heard that this Golden Peaks, it's a Coca-Cola tea, had like 38 grams of sugar in a bottle or something like that. Really high. And yep, sure enough, move over, Snickers candy bar ice cream. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Imagine if the kids knew about this stuff. And this, I watched the medical school students were in the same building taking classes, eating the snacks they had just bought from that place. So what does that tell you if the medical system, the medical students, and the health promotion students are all exposed to this kind of food? And the health promotion students were actually upset about this. I was upset. A lot of people were. We talked to our professors, and our professors in health promotion and public health were upset as well. And this is all secondhand, so I really don't want to confirm or deny or say anything that isn't true. But somebody very high up, related to the medical school, potentially on the medical school side, not the public health side, determined that that would be an acceptable type of food to serve in this school. So I don't know who decided that, but that is the state of affairs where these medical schools are. Unfortunately, a lot of the research that's been shared is sponsored by industry. So when you look at studies that look very convincing, and you'll need to read thousands and thousands of words, you may even need to pay money. Like a recent study with the FODMAP diet, that I was reading that compared the low FODMAP diet to gut hypnotherapy. It's got the video on this channel. And I didn't go fully into it, but the authors had received a lot of money from many different pharmaceutical companies, from Nestle, from Dannon Milk, from the A2 Milk Company. I mean, they were receiving funding from industries that would benefit from the notion that hypnotherapy is potentially even better than changing your whole diet and doing a low FODMAP diet and cutting out milk, which is part of the low FODMAP diet. But, if it was sponsored by Dannon and A2, I can't say that that's cause and effect there, but there are so many studies that look good on paper that are costly to actually read. And when you do read them and you start to realize this study was only 25 people in each group and it was short, and some of the findings were at 6 months saying the low FODMAP group did worse. It's because you're not supposed to do a low FODMAP diet for 6 months. It's supposed to be for 6 weeks, and you're supposed to reintroduce it. So, literally, the methods of the study created a perception that maybe you don't need to change your diet to improve your health. You could just meditate, in a sense. And so, it gets so confusing if you don't have the knowledge, you haven't gotten a bachelor's degree in science, then gotten a master's degree, taken 3 different biostatistics classes, and I did really well in those classes, but it was hard. It was confusing at times, and it still is. You've got to understand what they're saying, whether something is significant, and whether on paper it's significant because we looked at 100,000 people, but, maybe that significance isn't as big as we thought it was, right? So I wanted to be able to understand what the research was saying. Part of this discussion and talking about my dad is that he had a large library full of amazing books. Dr. Greger's teachings, Dr. Neil Barnard's teachings, Kelly McGonigal, as I mentioned, with willpower and mental health. And a lot of these teachings were very pivotal in my life. I was also developing a yoga practice. I got certified in 2016 in yoga and learned meditation. Even part of our yoga program was practicing a whole food plant-based diet, and we were actually rewarded in a way that was really fun, kind of a gamified program and plan. And so my journey, the reason why I'm so passionate about this is I went from living in chronic pain for 5 to 10 years and getting out of that in a slow way. Honestly, way slower than I hope that any of you will go. I mean, it took me 3, 5, 6 years to really get to the right place that somebody could have helped me do in a month to 3 months to understand and focus and move forward in that way. So I want to speed up your journey because I know a lot of women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they don't have 10 years. They don't have, $60,000 to spend on a master's degree to learn, you might even, like, I didn't even necessarily learn the research. I learned how to think critically about the research, and I brought my own research to the table, but they did not actually teach you how to be healthy when getting the master's of public health. They taught us how to apply research that maybe you learned on your own or not to programs so that you could get funding, right? And so a lot of times these programs, sometimes writing grants, which I have done for a few years while I was getting my master's, a lot of times they tell you exactly what you need to do, and you actually don't really get to pick the program. So there can be millions and millions of dollars of funding for a program that may not be the best program for you actually, but it's just offered kind of freely. And so I was writing grants for that, and I was interested in the fact that there are some programs that will never happen, never be created unless I do it. Like the whole health method, like nobody's going to bring this all together, orchestrate care so that we can focus on gut health, so that we can improve our weight, so that we can balance our hormones and feel better in our body, get out of pain, chronic disease, autoimmune diseases. And, a really interesting thing is throughout my journey here, a lot of people have told me you need to focus in on one population and one problem, right? And that is the reductionist paradigm, right? That is this idea that we need to break things down small and we need to only focus in on one part of health, one part of the body, just the shoulder, just the stomach, just the brain. And it's never sat right with me, you know, never sat well to think that I need to focus it like I need to be wholly healthy. I need my right hand to be healthy. I need my gut to be healthy. I need my brain to be healthy in my body, right? So that's really where my journey is today, is that I appreciate being able to focus in on people that are most willing to make that leap, to get help, to work with somebody to speed that journey up. And I hang out with a lot of women, more women than men, honestly. And, we also cook amazing food. Like we have had the most delicious food this year. We have an intern joining us. Her name is Bella Kari Kari. Shout out to Bella. And she's joined our program 2 months ago, came on to support us. She's already lost 15 pounds. It's 2 pounds a week, doing amazing. She's loving her food. All of her friends are asking her, like, she looks amazing. She seems to lose a lot of weight. Like, what's happening? And so, really, really awesome, Bella. And we'll be bringing her on the channel as well. But to just see these journeys and see these transformations and to eat this amazing food. We had a recent retreat up in the mountains of Northwest Georgia, and Bella and Steph just made amazing, amazing food. And we had desserts. We got to enjoy sweet potatoes in different ways. We got to have cinnamon date bread rolls, and we got to play and have fun. So a lot of people and a lot of women that I talk to who are on diets, they're doing no carb or low carb. And as a result, they're cutting out really healthy foods because carbohydrates actually fuel our digestive system, fuel our body and our brain. Um, and it doesn't taste good at all. And so, yeah, you lose 30 pounds in a month, but it's completely unsustainable, right? And so I'm seeing on the internet, I'm seeing online, there are a lot of coaches recommending things that can actually work. You can actually lose 20 pounds. You can actually lose 30 pounds. But at the end of the day, you may gain it back if it's not a doable lifelong thing for you. If it's not sustainable for your needs, customly tailored, you could probably just gain it back. And it's not just gaining back the weight. So if you lose 30 pounds, a lot of times, it's different for everyone, but around 30% of that weight loss could be muscle loss. If you do keto diet and you cut out carbohydrates, you're actually losing a lot of muscle. And there's research on this. Sometimes people can do keto, do resistance training, do a lot of muscle building training and not actually build muscles because their body is taking the glucose out of their muscles to use it. So you can power your brain. Turns out it's important to get glucose to your brain for longevity reasons and, for it to function. So, um, but as a result, people are being told, like, increase your protein, astronomic levels of protein. And you can eat protein, but the more protein that you're eating from animal products, it's not just the protein you're getting. You're getting what's called bioaccumulation. So we know that there's a lot of toxins. It's sad. It's really unfortunate. If you love nature like I do, you know that the contaminants are often running into the waterways, right? So the easiest way to show this is with fish. You can look at mercury levels, you can look at PCBs, forever chemicals, and you can see that, these toxins build up the more that animals eat animals. So in tuna and dolphin that eat fish, that eat fish, that eat fish, you get more and more contamination. And so the least contamination is eating the plants, right? That's going to be the lowest level of contaminants. But as you eat animals, you start to get more contamination along with the protein. And you often get saturated fat, which does raise your cholesterol, does increase your risk of heart disease, which is the number one killer of Americans, at least. And also, you have hormones. We've got hormones in animal products. So we have estrogen-like compounds. We've got progesterone in milk, estrogen in milk. We have, viruses that animals have. We have E. coli, salmonella. All these things that the E. coli and salmonella on your spinach came because it was fertilized by animal poop, right? So you can get viruses that come from animals that do not come from plants. So in the end of the day, I've learned that the more whole plant foods we're able to eat, the better we're going to feel, the closer we move towards nourishing ourselves with beans, greens, whole grains, nuts and seeds, mushrooms. The closer we are to eating in season with nature, the better we're going to feel. And you probably know that, I think, I hope. But, even if you don't, just knowing that information doesn't mean that you're able to actually implement that in your life, right? Unfortunately, or fortunately, we have friends and family, but unfortunately, a lot of times maybe they don't understand. Maybe they're confused or maybe they're scared as well, right? Like, am I doing something wrong if you're eating well and different? And why do you have to eat that way? I feel bad that, are you saying I'm bad now, right? Like, these are the kind of conversations that can happen and derail your success. Like, your partner not being on board with your journey, right? And so that's where the communication piece really comes in, is that, in social work, which I was also getting a master's of social work for program development, community empowerment, is we learn about the biopsychosocial and spiritual. Everything that predicts your behavior is either biological, psychological, social, or spiritual, right? I like it. It's good categories. We can work with that. And so, from a biological perspective, the ways that we're interacting with food are really key to how we show up in life, right? But psychology, the way that our minds see the world around us, the ways that the ways that we see ourselves, see our own identity, right? Like, people, oh my gosh, like I would love to not eat animals, but my coach told me I need to increase my protein, start eating more chicken or something like that. Like identities, right? Like, we don't want to eat the animals. We love animals, right? Hopefully, most of us. And, you don't have to increase the protein, eat more animal protein, drink more milk, right? You don't have to do that. And so to share this with people gives me a lot of joy that, from an environmental perspective, for those that care about the earth around them, for those that care about the animals that share this world with us, right? We can make an amazing impact by eating more plants and at the same time make an impact on our body and our health. That's just amazing. Like, we can decrease the suffering of animals. We can increase the well-being of the planet as we plant native edible foods, which I grow in my garden. I grow in gardens around the neighborhood here in Atlanta. And, we can actually reduce the suffering in our bodies. We're seeing people reverse heart disease, reverse type 2 diabetes, get off of that medication to be able to, reverse early stages of dementia, prostate cancers, women that have reversed breast cancer, women who've slowed the progression of MS, talking about Dr. Saray Stancic, who I was able to interview as well. Dr. Brooke Goldner, who's done lupus, works with women doing that. I mean, just amazing women in the field. Christy Funk, that was able to undo her breast cancer diagnosis and work with people. So, I mean, there's so many amazing people and women and men that I've met along the way that have shared their health journeys, cancer, diabetes, and the hardest thing to do in public health, the hardest thing they say is to actually have people care about their health before a problem happens, right? Before they're saddled with medical debt, before they're, deep into 5 or 6 medication. It's hard for people to change when they're actually feeling okay, right? And so that's where the coaching, the support, the community, I think is so important, is that when things are socially acceptable and they're fun, they're enjoyable by community, it makes it easy, right? It's enjoyable. When you're the only one doing it, you're alone, you don't have any support, nobody around you knows what you're talking about. You have to be extremely motivated. It's maybe 1 in 100 people can do that, but what about everyone else? You need to have that social support. That's why we build community here in Atlanta. There's amazing communities online that we can connect you with, that by communities, I mean all over the world, where you can meet people. So that's what I did at Plant Pure Communities. I connected people to other leaders so that they could actually have community and not be alone. And that's been pivotal, and that's the social aspect in the biopsychosocial, right? And then spiritually, like the energy of tending to plants, that certain plants actually benefit from being eaten. Like when you pick certain plants, they grow more vigorously. Think about rosemary, think about certain mints that love to be pruned. Think about different greens. So, then you can think about animals realistically. The chicken did not used to have 330 eggs a year. If we're talking about women and women's well-being, we've bred chicken to go from 13 eggs a year, like most women tend to have before, menses. And, we've bred them to have so many where their legs are not able to hold them up anymore. It's an unhealthy amount. And humans would not have had access to that many eggs more than 10,000 years ago, since the invention of agriculture. So these are relatively new things to have 3 eggs a day when there are birds with eggs around, but if you can find any, let me know. It's really hard to find a nest, let alone 2 big eggs every single day, right? So that's out of balance. And then with milk, you learn that mothers, right? Maybe your mother, maybe your grandmother, maybe you're not. Maybe you're child free and enjoying that as well. Milk is only produced after pregnancy, or you can actually genetically engineer cows to produce milk during pregnancy, which is upsetting. And when you do that, it actually increases the estrogen levels in milk so that the day before the calf is born, that's the highest levels of estrogen, progesterone, all of those compounds that are increasing estrogenic cancers and increased estrogen levels in the body. But typically the milk of a mother is meant for who? The baby, right? Typically it's meant for the baby. And so when we drink that milk and we impregnate these cows, as soon as they have a baby, they're impregnated again by a man, and puts his hand, impregnates the cow. And what happens? Now they've genetically engineered cows to start producing milk so that we can then take the milk and then we can give it to consumers. So what is that going to do to your health? It's got insulin growth like factor. It's got hormones that are meant to take a cow from 5, 10, 15 pounds all the way to 300 pounds. And so myself, I was 200 pounds. I was drinking a lot of milk. They told me to drink milk to get more protein, stronger bones, all that, which is not true. And so I was going on the rate of growing to the size of a cow, an adult cow, 300 pounds. And so that is growth fluid that's meant for a baby, right? And so there are amazing nut milks, there are amazing plant milks out there, and we actually have a nut milk maker, and if you need one, like, highly recommend it. You can just soak nuts, you can just soak beans, and soybeans are just really amazing, especially for women's health and hormones. They had a study where there's 21% reductions in menopausal symptoms just adding soy milk to their diet every single day for 12 weeks. And It tastes good. I add it to my golden milk, which helps with inflammation, helps with internal inflammation and full body inflammation, thanks to the turmeric and thanks to little black pepper. But suffice it to say is that the dairy is not helping us. And it's harming mothers, it's harming women, it's harming women in terms of the estrogenic, effects, in terms of endometriosis, in terms of, reproductive cancers. There's increased risk the more dairy we're consuming. And these animal products, if you did hunt, if you did find animals in the wild to eat, it's pretty rare. I mean, some dogs, like my dog's pretty good at catching a squirrel every now and then, but she's not going to catch a deer. And typically the amount that we're eating is way more than any of our ancestors would eat, right? So I'm not asking you to go vegan. I'm not, unless you want to. And if you want to, then I can support you every step of that way. But I am asking you to consider that the amount of eggs, dairy, chicken, and meat is way higher than any point in history that humans have ever existed. And that level of height is causing a lot of our chronic disease. And that's what I've learned through getting a master's of public health and reading the research.